The courtroom was already irritated before Elias Mercer said a word. It was 9:17 on a wet Tuesday morning, and Judge Daniel Whitmore had 32 cases on his docket, 2 attorneys whispering beside the clerk's desk, and a prosecutor who had already asked twice whether they could break early for lunch. Then the bailiff brought in the old man, 71 years old, thin, grey beard, a brown coat with one missing button. Mud dried around the edges of his shoes. His wrists were cuffed in front of him. The charge was trespassing. Nothing dramatic, nothing that should have taken more than 5 minutes. Elias Mercer had been found asleep inside the old Franklin County Courthouse, a building that had been abandoned for 12 years and was scheduled to be demolished the following Monday. The prosecutor requested a small fine and time served. Judge Whitmore barely looked up. "Mr. Mercer, your attorney tells me you no longer want his representation. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge finally raised his eyes. Elias was standing perfectly still. "You understand that you are entitled to counsel?" "I do." "And you still wish to represent yourself?" "I do." A few people in the gallery looked up from their phones. Judge Whitmore removed his glasses. He was 61, silver-haired, carefully dressed, and 23 years into a judicial career that had made his name almost synonymous with the courthouse. He had no patience for theatrics. "Mr. Mercer, this is a court of law. Defending yourself is rarely wise. I understand. Do you?" The judge leaned back. "And where exactly did you study law, Mr. Mercer?" Someone behind the prosecutor laughed. Elias looked at the judge. "Same place you did, Daniel." The laughter stopped. The judge's face changed. Not much, but enough. Nobody in that courtroom called Judge Whitmore Daniel. The prosecutor looked from one man to the other. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Have we met?" Elias didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the clerk. "Before we begin, I'd like the court to retrieve Case 417-B. The clerk began typing. Judge Whitmore's fingers stopped moving. The clerk typed again. She frowned. "Your Honor, there's no case under that number." Elias nodded slowly. "Of course there isn't." Judge Whitmore stared at him, and for the first time that morning, the 32 cases waiting on his docket no longer mattered. Because he remembered the number, he remembered exactly where he had seen it, 27 years earlier, before the grey hair, before the robe, before anyone called him Your Honor, and before a 19-year-old boy named Marcus Bell was sent to prison for murder. Daniel Whitmore had been 31 then, young enough to believe ambition was the same thing as purpose. He was an assistant district attorney with 2 cheap suits, a second-hand Buick, and a photograph of Robert Kennedy hanging above his desk. He wanted important cases. Then Rebecca Langley died. Rebecca was 20 years old, a university student, and the only daughter of Charles Langley, one of the wealthiest businessmen in Franklin County. Her body was found behind an abandoned textile warehouse shortly after midnight. She had been struck in the head. Her purse was missing. Her watch was gone. And according to 2 witnesses, she had been seen arguing with Marcus Bell earlier that evening. Marcus was 19, a scholarship student, quiet, bright, and terrified from the moment police put him in the interrogation room. He admitted knowing Rebecca. He admitted arguing with her. But he said he hadn't killed her. The police didn't believe him. Then they found Rebecca's watch in Marcus's dormitory. The case seemed complete. Daniel Whitmore was assigned to assist the prosecution. For a young lawyer, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. The newspapers printed his name. Television cameras waited outside the courthouse. Charles Langley sat behind the prosecutors every day. and across the aisle sat Marcus Bell beside a 34-year-old public defender named Elias Mercer. Elias had been practicing law for 6 years. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. His suits never fit quite right. But he believed Marcus. Not because Marcus cried, not because Marcus's mother begged him. Elias believed him because the evidence bothered him. Rebecca's watch had been found in Marcus's room, but no fingerprints were recovered from it. One witness claimed to have seen Marcus near the warehouse at 11:40. Another placed him almost a mile away 12 minutes later, and Rebecca's estimated time of death kept changing. Elias challenged everything. Daniel answered everything. For 9 days, the two men fought across that courtroom. Then the prosecution called its final witness. His name was Peter Hale. He worked security at a parking garage near the warehouse. Hale testified that he had seen Marcus following Rebecca shortly before midnight. That testimony closed the gap. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. Marcus Bell's mother screamed when the verdict was read. Marcus didn't. He turned toward Elias. "Mr. Mercer?" Elias leaned close. "I'll appeal." Marcus nodded. Then he slipped something into Elias's hand, a small brass key. "If nobody believes me now, someday somebody will." Elias didn't understand. Not then. Marcus was sentenced to life imprisonment. Daniel Whitmore became a rising star, and Charles Langley shook Daniel's hand outside the courthouse while cameras flashed. But 11 days after the verdict, Elias received a telephone call. Peter Hale wanted to meet, the prosecution's star witness. They met at a diner at 2:30 in the morning. Hale was shaking so badly he spilled his coffee. Then he told Elias something that could have changed everything. He had lied. He had not seen Marcus following Rebecca. A police detective had shown him Marcus's photograph before the lineup, and someone connected to Charles Langley had offered to pay his debts if he testified. Elias asked him to repeat it. Haley did. This time, Elias recorded him. The following morning, Elias prepared an emergency motion requesting a new trial. He attached Hale's statement. The filing was assigned a number, 417-B. Elias personally carried it to the old Franklin County Courthouse. He watched the clerk stamp it. Then he went home. The hearing was supposed to happen 48 hours later. It never did. When Elias returned, there was no record of the motion, no recording, no witness statement, nothing. Peter Hale disappeared. The clerk who had accepted the filing insisted she couldn't remember it, and when Elias demanded an investigation, he was told there was nothing to investigate. He accused the prosecutor's office of suppressing evidence. He accused the police. And eventually, publicly, he accused Daniel Whitmore. Daniel denied everything. Elias didn't believe him. Neither man knew that 27 years later they would be standing in the same courtroom again. One wearing a judge's robe, the other wearing handcuffs. Judge Whitmore ordered the courtroom cleared. Elias objected. "I'd prefer witnesses." "This is a trespassing hearing." "Then why are you afraid of an audience?" The judge's jaw tightened. The prosecutor stared down at her papers. Whitmore looked at Elias for several seconds. Then he told the bailiff to leave the gallery alone. "Mr. Mercer, what exactly are you doing here?" Elias looked around the room. "Defending myself." "From trespassing?" "No." Elias paused. From 27 years of being called a liar. The courtroom went silent. Whitmore leaned forward. "You accused me of destroying that filing." "I did." "And you were wrong." "Then tell me what happened to it." "I don't know." Elias smiled without humor. "That's what you said 27 years ago." Because it was true 27 years ago. Something in Whitmore's voice made Elias hesitate. The anger was there, but beneath it was something else. Pain. Whitmore stood. "I never saw your motion." Elias stared at him. "I never heard Peter Hale's statement. I never touched your recording, and I never ordered anything destroyed." "Then someone did." "Yes." Whitmore's voice dropped. "And I've wondered who for most of my life." Elias said nothing. The judge slowly sat back down. For 27 years, Elias had imagined this moment. He had imagined Daniel lying. He had imagined exposing him. He had imagined watching the powerful young prosecutor finally admit what he had done. But Elias knew liars. He had cross-examined hundreds, and looking at Daniel Whitmore now, something bothered him. The man appeared ashamed, but not guilty of what Elias had accused him of. Elias reached into his coat. The bailiff stepped forward. "Easy." Elias slowly removed a small brass key. Whitmore stared at it. "Marcus gave me this before they took him away." "What does it open?" "I didn't know." "Didn't?" "I found out 3 months ago." Elias turned the key between his fingers. "That's why I was inside the old courthouse." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. Elias explained. 3 months earlier, the county had announced that the abandoned courthouse would be demolished. Old records were being catalogued. Photographs of the building appeared online. One photograph showed a row of evidence lockers in the basement, and Elias saw something he had forgotten. Tiny brass locks, the same manufacturer, the same shape. He drove to the courthouse. The building was fenced. He couldn't enter legally. He contacted the county records office. No response. He contacted the court administrator. No response. Then he saw the demolition notice, Monday, 6 days away. So Elias broke in. He tried the key. Locker 214 opened. But before he could remove what was inside, security found him. He had enough time to close the locker, enough time to put the key back into his pocket, and enough time to make a decision. He wouldn't run. He would get arrested, because the trespassing charge would bring him before a judge. He checked the rotation schedule first. He knew exactly which judge would be sitting that Tuesday, Daniel Whitmore. Whitmore stared at him. "You arranged this?" "I waited 27 years. I could wait 3 more nights." "What is inside locker 214? Elias looked directly at him. "I don't know." "You opened it?" "I did." "And?" "There was a box." "What kind of box?" "Evidence." Whitmore stood immediately. Court was adjourned. Within 2 hours, a preservation order stopped all demolition activity at the old courthouse. By afternoon, police, court officials, 2 independent attorneys, and a state investigator were standing in its basement. Elias was there. So was Daniel. Nobody wanted either man touching anything. An investigator took the brass key. Locker 214 opened. Inside was a cardboard evidence box covered in dust. The label had faded, but one line remained readable. Langley, Rebecca, 1997. Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. The investigator opened it. There were photographs, a sealed envelope, a woman's scarf, 3 evidence bags, and a cassette tape. Someone had written 4 words across its label. Rebecca, 3 days before. They found an old cassette player upstairs. The investigator inserted the tape. Static filled the room. Then a young woman's voice. Rebecca Langley. Alive. Laughing at first. She appeared to be recording a message for a friend. Then her voice changed. She said her father had discovered something. She said they had argued. She said he was furious about a man she had been seeing. Not Marcus, someone else. Then she said something that made everyone in the room stop moving. If anything happens to me, don't let Daddy tell them it was Marcus. Daniel closed his eyes. The tape continued. Rebecca said Marcus had been helping her. She wanted to leave home. Her father controlled her money, her school, her relationships, everything. Marcus had offered to help her find somewhere safe. That was why they had argued earlier that evening. Rebecca had changed her mind. Marcus had told her she was making a mistake. Then came the final sentence. Daddy said if I embarrass this family again, he'll make sure nobody ever hears from me. The tape clicked. Silence. Elias looked at Daniel. 27 years disappeared between them. Daniel looked old, not 61, older. He sat down on a dusty wooden chair. I didn't know. Elias said nothing. I swear to you, I didn't know. Elias wanted to hate him. For years, hatred had been easier. It gave shape to everything he'd lost. But the man sitting before him wasn't celebrating. He was breaking. The state investigation began immediately, and the deeper they went, the worse it became. Peter Hale had received $28,000 6 weeks after Marcus's conviction. The money came through a company controlled by Charles Langley. The detective who conducted Marcus's lineup later received a lucrative private security contract from another Langley company. The courthouse clerk who processed 417B had paid off her mortgage 3 months later. And Rebecca's watch? It had never been properly logged when police claimed to find it in Marcus's room. A photograph showed it entering evidence before the official search had even occurred. Someone had planted it. But one question remained. Who killed Rebecca? Charles Langley had died 7 years earlier. There would be no trial, no confession, no courtroom revelation, only evidence. Enough evidence to establish that Marcus Bell's conviction was unsafe. Enough to prove that the case against him had been manipulated, and enough to prove that powerful people had protected Charles Langley while a 19-year-old boy went to prison. Marcus spent 11 years there. Then one winter morning, he collapsed in the prison workshop. An undiagnosed heart condition. He died before the ambulance arrived. He was 30. Elias had attended the funeral. He stood at the back. Marcus's mother never looked at him. Elias stopped practicing law 6 months later. At first he told people he needed time. Then months became years. His marriage ended. He drank. He moved from apartment to apartment, and every few years he opened a small wooden box containing a brass key he didn't understand. Daniel Whitmore's life moved in the opposite direction. District attorney, state prosecutor, judge, awards, photographs, speeches about justice, and financial support from the Langley Foundation followed him throughout his career. A courthouse education wing carried Charles Langley's name. The foundation funded legal aid clinics, scholarships, youth programs. Daniel had stood beside Charles Langley at ribbon cuttings. He had praised him publicly. Now, every photograph looked different. 3 weeks after Elias's arrest, the courtroom was full again, but nobody was laughing. News crews occupied the back row. Marcus Bell's surviving relatives sat together. His mother, Ruth Bell, was 82. She walked with a cane. Elias hadn't spoken to her in 27 years. When she entered, their eyes met. She looked away. Elias lowered his head. Judge Whitmore entered. Everyone stood. Daniel remained standing after everyone else sat. He looked at the courtroom, then at Ruth, then at Elias. The matter before this court concerns the conviction of Marcus Anthony Bell. His voice nearly failed on Marcus's name. He continued. The evidence now available demonstrates serious misconduct, suppression of exculpatory evidence, witness manipulation, and fundamental violations of Mr. Bell's constitutional rights. Daniel looked down at the order before him. This court cannot restore 11 years. He paused. It cannot return a son to his mother. Ruth began crying. It cannot give Marcus Bell the life that was taken from him. Daniel swallowed. But this court can do one thing. He picked up his pen. It can stop repeating the lie. He signed. The conviction of Marcus Anthony Bell is hereby vacated. Nobody moved. Then Ruth Bell covered her face. Elias stared at the table. For 27 years he had imagined feeling victorious. He felt nothing like victory. He felt grief, because Marcus was still dead. Outside, reporters waited. But before court adjourned, Elias stood. "Your Honor." Daniel looked at him. "I'm not finished." Elias reached inside his coat. This time, nobody moved toward him. He removed an envelope, yellowed, bent around the edges. "Marcus wrote this from prison." Ruth looked up. "I received it 3 months before he died." Daniel stared at the envelope. "You never opened it?" "No." "Why?" Elias looked toward Ruth. "Because I was afraid he hated me." For the first time, Ruth looked directly at him. Elias walked forward. He placed the letter on Daniel's bench. "I think it belongs in the record." Daniel carefully opened it. The paper inside had been folded twice. Marcus's handwriting was small. Daniel began reading. Marcus wrote about prison, about his mother, about how much he missed ordinary things. Rain against his bedroom window, his mother's Sunday cooking, walking somewhere without asking permission. Then he wrote about Elias. He said he knew Elias blamed himself. He told him not to. Elias's eyes filled. Daniel stopped reading. Elias nodded for him to continue. Then came the final paragraph. Marcus wrote that anger was keeping him alive, but he didn't want anger to become the only thing that survived him. And then Daniel reached the final lines. "If the truth ever comes out, don't use it to punish the man who put me here." Daniel stopped. The courtroom waited. His voice cracked when he continued. "Make him use whatever life he has left to put somebody else free." Daniel lowered the letter. For 27 years, Marcus Bell had been a case to him, a conviction, a mistake, a shadow that sometimes appeared when the courthouse became quiet. Now, Marcus had become a 19-year-old boy again, and that boy was offering mercy to men who had failed him. Daniel removed his glasses. He covered his eyes. Nobody interrupted him. Elias was crying too. Ruth Bell stood, slowly, painfully. She walked toward Elias. He couldn't look at her. "Mrs. Bell, I'm sorry." She stopped in front of him. I promised him I'd get him out. His voice broke. "I failed." Ruth lifted one hand. Elias expected anger. Instead, she placed it against his cheek. "My son spent 11 years in prison." She looked toward Daniel. "You spent 27. Elias looked at her. So did he. Then Ruth Bell walked out of the courtroom. The trespassing charge against Elias Mercer was dismissed. Daniel Whitmore resigned from the bench 17 days later. People assumed he resigned because of scandal. They were partly right. But 6 months later, Elias received a telephone call. A legal aid office on the south side needed volunteers. Someone had listed Elias as a reference. He hadn't practiced law in almost 3 decades. He almost hung up. Instead, he asked who had given them his name. The receptionist laughed. "He's sitting right here." Elias drove across town. The office was above a laundromat. No marble floors, no portraits, no cameras. He climbed the stairs. Through a glass partition he saw Daniel Whitmore. No robe, no expensive suit, just shirt sleeves. He was sitting across from a frightened 17-year-old boy and his mother. The boy had been arrested for something Elias couldn't hear. Daniel was listening, really listening. Elias stood outside the glass. Daniel eventually looked up. Their eyes met. Neither man smiled. Neither needed to. Then Elias noticed something hanging on the wall behind Daniel's desk. A frame. Inside it was a photocopy of an old courthouse filing. Across the top were 3 faded numbers and 1 letter, 417-B. Underneath, Daniel had placed a small brass plaque. It contained only 5 words. Listen before you decide who they are. Elias opened the office door. Daniel stood. There you are. Elias looked at the teenager, then at the empty chair beside him. What do you need? A lawyer. Elias stared at him. I haven't been one for 27 years. Daniel shook his head. No. He pointed toward the chair. You just haven't been in a courtroom. Elias sat down, and somewhere across town, beneath a simple stone bearing the name Marcus Anthony Bell, rain began falling softly onto the grass. Marcus never became the engineer he wanted to be. He never married. He never had children. He never got those 11 years back. No court could repair that. No apology could make it fair. But 27 years after the world decided a frightened 19-year-old boy was disposable, his words were still defending people. The courthouse that convicted him was demolished the following spring. The Charles Langley Legal Education Wing was renamed, and before the demolition crew arrived, Elias returned one final time. He stood inside the empty courtroom where Marcus had been convicted. Dust covered the benches. Sunlight entered through cracked windows. The judge's chair was gone. The prosecutor's table was gone. But one thing remained. The wooden rail where Marcus had rested his hands while the jury pronounced him guilty. Elias touched it. Then he placed the brass key on top. He didn't need it anymore. Some cases are closed when a judge signs an order. Others remain open inside us until somebody finally has the courage to tell the truth. And sometimes justice arrives so late that it can no longer save the person who deserved it. When that happens, perhaps the only thing left is to make sure their suffering saves somebody else. 27 years earlier, Marcus Bell told Elias that if nobody believed him then, someday somebody would. He was right. It simply took far too long.